Welcome to the Golden State with Mates Postgame live on what thankfully and pleasantly is another Warrior victory, the third straight of preseason to begin. Another really impressive performance from the Warrior younger players in a game where they were absent, both Stephen Curry and Chris Paul. This is coming a little bit later. Obviously, it's nearly 4 p.m. my time, but of course, we had an overtime game here against the Kings at Golden One Center. So the Warriors get the 121-115 victory. Some real stifling defense to conclude the overtime period. But it was another story of Jonathan Kuminga, who top scored for the Warriors, led the game in scoring for a third straight game to open preseason. 28 points. He did it a bit differently to what we saw in the opening two matchups against the Los Angeles Lakers. But he was quite impressive again. 28 points, 7 for 18 shooting, so slightly inefficient compared to what we have seen from him in the first two games. But he got to the free throw line on 17 occasions, which again just goes to highlight and showcase the different ways in which he can score. And I think that in particular, the ability to get to the free throw line is going to be huge for a Warrior team who we know has struggled in that area across the last few teams, really since, the Steph Curry, Steve Kerr era, where they primarily play a perimeter system, obviously based on their great three-point shooting in Steph and Clay. So it's going to be a big element that the Warriors can utilize going forward here in Jonathan Kuminga. And, we saw him without CP and without Steph. He obviously got the start, so the Golden State starting lineup for this one was Brandon Pajemski starting at the 1 with Clay at the 2, Wiggs at the 3, JK at the 4, Loon at the 5. And we saw, obviously, without Steph and CP, we saw a lot of, not point guard Jonathan Kuminga, I'm not going to call it that, but a lot more volume for him, a lot more on-ball opportunity, a lot more post-up opportunities, which was really, I guess, the go-to for the Warriors in this one, both through Kuminga and Andrew Wiggins as well, who I'll get to in a second. He was quite impressive, definitely his best performance through the first three games to date. But JK, his ability to explode to the rim, they struggled to stop him aside from, having to foul. The best thing about this one for Jonathan Kuminga was the fact that he missed his first 3 free throws. And then he makes 13 of his last 14, including some clutch ones down the stretch as well. We saw him make those 2 free throws against the Lakers on was it Saturday, my time, to close that one out, which, he'd missed a few before that as well. And I think it's really, showcasing the growth and development in his game, not just from a physical standpoint, but also from a mental standpoint, the fact that he can step up in the big moments, make the big plays. And this was a game that the Warriors wanted and Steve Kerr wanted to win because JK, he had, I think it was 9 points, maybe through the first 7 minutes of the fourth quarter. And then he left the ball game. And I think at that point, a lot of people thought that would be him done for the night. But no, close game down the stretch. He came back in the final couple of minutes and then played through overtime as well. So it was a game, aside from the fact that Steph wasn't playing, CP wasn't playing, Clay didn't play at all in the second half, Wiggins didn't play at all, and from halfway through the third quarter, same with Looney as well. But aside from that, it was a game that the Warriors wanted to win clearly because they still had the likes of Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody, Brandon Pajemski started, obviously. They wanted to get those young players into a situation down the stretch where they can, build and work on their clutch moments and making the right decisions and, executing correctly in the most pressurized moments. So Jonathan Kuminga, you can't say, enough about his performance again. 24, 26, and now 28 points, I think, through the first 3 games so far. Again, doing it in a variety of ways. He went 7 for 12 from 3 in the first 2 games. Didn't have his shot falling today, but the aggression to get to the rim. I think the biggest thing for me here is the fact that he's too good for reserve units. And I cannot wait to see Chris Paul, Jonathan Kuminga in second units together because I guess the one worry with JK today was the fact that he didn't get as many easy buckets as what you may have liked. He got a couple out in transition, a few layups at the rim, which were fine. But aside from that, it felt like everything really had to be, forced at the rim kind of thing, especially in those post-up opportunities. And yes, he was able to get to the line at will on 17 occasions, and nail 13 of them. But it certainly wasn't the kind of free-flowing scoring performance that you'd seen from JK in the first two games where, he was knocking down his jump shots and whatever else. So it's going to be fascinating to see going forward how much opportunity he's going to get within the Warrior offense. Because I thought today or tonight's game was more of an outlier, I suppose, in how the Warriors are going to play, because they're really, unless there's injuries, they're most of the time, maybe on the occasional back-to-back, it might be different, but they're really going to have, Steph Curry and Chris Paul on the floor in at least every game, and most of them, obviously, they'll have both of them. And this one was just an outlier in terms of the amount of volume and on-ball opportunity that JK was going to be able to get. But again, looking forward to seeing him and Chris Paul in the same unit together, because if you can just get JK a few more easy ones, then what can he score? Like what can he literally score for the Warriors this season in terms of average points? Now, he averaged just under 10 in both of his first two seasons. I think it was 9.6 last season. I think you would have thought, 15 is probably right. I think 15 right now has to be the minimum, doesn't it? Because again, he's going to get these opportunities in, second night of back-to-backs and whatever, where he can really go and do what he wants. And, the Warriors do need his scoring, to be fair, and they needed his scoring in this one. And so I do think that, we see a chance here for him to average 15 plus at a minimum. Can he get closer to 20? I don't think so. I don't think there's necessarily going to be the shots around when you factor in Steph and Wiggs and Clay. And, even Chris Paul, you'd think would average his, 12, 13 points and he'll get his shot attempts. But, there's a case here to be made that, is he I've seen people on Twitter say, is he a six-man candidate this season? I wouldn't go that far. I think I checked his odds the other day. I think he's about $51, or I think he might be 50. In fact, I'll check it now. I think he's 50. This is obviously an Australian odds, so I'm not sure it's 51 to 1 basically. But I think that's for most improved. I'm just checking it up here. NBA Player Awards. So most improved player, he is at $51. And then six-man, which is what people have been running with, which it's just a bit funny because Chris Paul is one of the favorites for six-man at 18 to 1. But JK, I'd assume he's down the list in terms of six-man. Yeah, he's at 76ers. So, a little bit of value there if you want it. He's making a leap here. And if I was going to have a bet on one of these, it'd definitely be most improved. For him, is there a world in which he goes from 10 points a game to 18, 19 points a game? Maybe. And, the rebounding has got to be a big element as well. The playmaking, that was probably my one slight concern. Obviously, just, aside from the inefficiency that we saw today, 7 of 18 shooting, my other slight concern was the fact he got so many post-up opportunities and he was almost always looking to score, which is fine when you're getting to the rim at will and players are fouling you and whatever else. But to have one assist with the amount of kind of on-ball opportunities he had, the amount of post-up opportunities he had in this one, I would have liked a little bit more in terms of that. And he's not scared. Let's be honest. He was in that starting lineup along with Clay and Wiggs. And even then in that starting lineup, there were plenty of times when it was JK post-up and he was just looking to score. And it didn't matter that, Clay and Wiggs were out on the perimeter and those two, I guess, should be in those lineups. They should be your primary scorers. But JK, they needed his scoring tonight, and they'll need his scoring at different points throughout the regular season. And again, it was just another showcasing of the fact that he can do it in a multitude of ways. The 3-point shot, the overall shooting isn't always going to be there, but he's smart, and that's what I think is really coming along in his game, and what he's actually had to an extent throughout his first 2 years, which I guess a lot of people have been concerned with the lack of basketball IQ, playing in the Warrior system. But I've been really impressed by the fact that he gets to the paint and the amount of guys that bite on his pump fake, particularly when it's still, not necessarily too close to the basket, and he's kind of going for fadeaway mid-ranges. If I'm an NBA defender at this point of Jonathan Kuminga's career, I'm not necessarily why would I bite on a mid-range pump fake? I just wouldn't. And yet, still, they do it. And he's been able to master that to an extent. We saw that again on multiple occasions, particularly with players that are now younger, or not necessarily younger age-wise, but younger in terms of experience. I think he had 13 points, was it? I think in the fourth quarter and overtime. He was just too good. He was literally just too good for the reserve unit of the Sacramento Kings. And that's what we're kind of getting to here is, first you get to a stage where, and I spoke about this with Evan Kornstrom on our last episode of the podcast, you get to a position, right, where you are a starting rotation player. Or not a starting rotation player, but a regular rotation player, I should say. And then you move into, well, this guy's just too good to be a bench player. And we're going to have to see it at times throughout, early in the regular season. But I've spoke about earlier in the off season where if he makes a start to the regular season like he has in this preseason, then all of a sudden there's going to be some question marks on whether this bloke should be starting and whether the Warriors could actually be a better team with him starting over, dare I say, Draymond Green. And I know that myself and others have already spoken about the fact that you go back to the 14-15 season or the 13-4, I think it was the 14-15, no, 13-14 season, I think. One of the two. Anyway, sorry. Having a mind blank. But just in regard to David Lee and the fact that, he had an early season injury, Draymond got the start, and then Draymond performed that well that you couldn't take him out of the starting lineup. And David Lee, once an all-star, had to come off the bench. And there's a reason we're talking about that now in regard to what we could see, ironically, with Draymond being in the David Lee situation with Kuminga. It's such a big year for him too, because it's in some ways a contract year. Now, yes, he's got a contract, and the Warriors will pick that up for his fourth season. But could we see an extension next off season? Maybe, but it'll clearly determine on how he performs this season. And I mean, based on what we've seen in the first three preseason games, you're looking at a guy who might be worth $100 million, based purely on these three games. Now, that sounds a bit ludicrous right now. It really does. And opposition fans will probably listen to this and think that is ridiculous. But that's what we've seen in these three games. And that's what I think, Warrior fans had been hoping to see throughout the entire offseason. This isn't a total surprise, right? Because he has flashed elements throughout his first two seasons, particularly last season, where he closed some games, where there were games last season where he was the Warriors' best or second best player on the floor, particularly when Steph and Wiggs were both out for that period, kind of, that January, February period. So I'm so excited to continue to watch Jonathan Kuminga develop, and he's been fantastic throughout the first three preseason games. Not faultless by any means. He had 5 fouls today. He had another 5 turnovers. There are still things. There are plenty of ways in which he can improve, but he's quite quickly becoming a player that opening night against the Phoenix Suns, he might have to play 25 plus minutes, particularly if Draymond's not fit and available, which is touch and go by the sounds of it at the moment. 25 plus minute player, I think. It's going to be huge. He's the X factor for Golden State. It's going to be absolutely huge. We could talk about Jonathan Kuminga for an hour, but I'll move on from him. Andrew Wiggins was probably the other player I wanted to talk about. Without Steph and without CP, the Warriors really needed his isolation scoring and his one-on-one shot-making ability. And I actually wrote about it a few weeks ago. He's averaged the last two seasons with the Warriors, he's averaged around early 17s, 17.1, 17.2 points per game. With Jordan Poole going out, I just wonder, where does obviously the scoring come from? Now, Kuminga's definitely one. There's going to be a big rise there. Paul's going to come in and he's going to average 12, 13. So it's not actually that much of a detriment or differential, I suppose, between him and Poole. It's 7-8 points here, let's say. But I just wonder if Wiggs can get to the 20-plus point per game scorer that he was in Minnesota. Now, obviously, the efficiency and everything like that has gone way up at the Warriors, and he's just a far better player, far better two-way presence for Golden State than he ever was with Minnesota. So you don't want to take away from the efficiency by any means, but you look at a performance like today when, he's going up against De'Aaron Fox, who I need to give some credit to De'Aaron Fox. His defense over the last 12, 18 months has significantly improved. And there were times today when Wiggs and JK were posting him up, and he did not move on the block at all. And we're talking about a 6'3", 180-pound guard. Just props to De'Aaron Fox because his defensive work, a lot of people would see what he's done in the last 12 months, last season, and just, focus on the offensive end of the floor and how explosive he is there, how efficient he is there, the two-man game with Sabonis. But defensively, fantastic. And I thought, his work today on a few of those possessions against Kuminga and Wiggins was, mightily impressive. But back to Wiggs, I do still think there are times where, particularly late in shot clocks, where the Warriors aren't necessarily getting anything going offensively. You can give him the ball and he is your bailout option, like KD was, in the 2016 to 2019 years, right? In that 3-year period, the Warriors had the ultimate bailout option in Kevin Durant. And I'm not saying Andrew Wiggins is that. Sorry. I'm not saying Andrew Wiggins is that. He's clearly not Kevin Durant. No one's comparing them. But just in terms of the role that he can play for the Warriors, this was a game where you saw the fact that you can put the ball in his hands and he can go and get you a bucket. And I think there were times last season when the Warriors could have really done with that. Now, maybe that isn't necessarily the case this season because you bring Chris Paul in and you hope that with Chris Paul that you get a pretty good look on almost every possession that he's on the floor. But I just think there are times when Andrew Wiggins could be utilized more in a way that he was in Minnesota. You got to try and find a balance, right? Because I'm not saying we want to go back to Andrew Wiggins, Minnesota, but there's a balance. There's a balance there. And I think it's also about Wiggs wanting the ball a little bit more. And maybe there are some times where he's a little bit placid and his kind of aggressiveness can go up and down, particularly throughout the regular season. But I thought he was fantastic. And some of his mid-range shot making, again, people say, well, that's not inefficient. Well, it is when you don't have Steph Curry, Chris Paul, Draymond Green on the floor. That's the other, Draymond was obviously out. I didn't mention that at the top, but I thought, that's obvious for most who I suppose are following the Warriors at the moment. But yeah, I'm just interested. Can he go back? Because if he wants, he recently had an interview with Sportskeeter's Mark Medina and said, I want to get back to being an all-star, all-star level best that we saw in 2022. And that wasn't necessarily, he only averaged 17.1 points in that season. But I think if he wants to be an all-star again, you're probably in this league with the amount of scoring that happens these days, the lack of defense across the league. I think you need to be at least a 20-point per game scorer to be an all-star. Like we see some 20-point per game scorers last season who were not even close to sniffing all-star. Like Jordan Poole was not close to sniffing an all-star game last season, yet he averaged 20 points per game. A decade ago, you averaged 20 points a game. You're almost a lock for the all-star weekend probably, but I think that's what he needs to do if he wants to get back to his all-star level best, and of course defensively, and hopefully leading a Warrior defense who slid from 2nd to 14th last season back up to hopefully a top 5 defense this season. But certainly his most impressive performance so far because he hasn't shot the ball overly well in the first 2 games. This was a good one. I think he shot 3 of 5 from 3-point range as well. So his shot was falling, and that was big. That was big for the Warriors. A couple off the bench that I wanted to mention. Firstly, Lester Quinones hasn't quite had the opportunity over the first 2 games. Let's rewind for a little bit back to Summer League. This guy was probably the most impressive aspect and element out of Summer League for the Warriors. Go back before that, he was the G League's most improved player last season. This is a guy that, when he was signed to a 2-way contract for the Warriors, everyone was really up and about because we thought, oh, maybe there's a chance he gets a guaranteed roster spot with another team, or at least, Golden State are forced into giving him a guaranteed roster spot because there is interest from other teams. But since then, really, I'm sure he'll agree, really disappointing World Cup campaign with the Dominican Republic. And then not much opportunity in the first 2 preseason games here. So he's kind of gone from a guy that hey, could this guy, play a role for the Warriors this season, to a kind of afterthought, I suppose, particularly with how well Podziemski's played over the first 2 games. But this was clearly his best performance since that summer league. And I think he should have had more opportunity. I think he should have played, one, he should have played more, and two, he should have been a little bit more on ball, in my opinion. So 18 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, 6 of 12 shooting. He should have played more, particularly in the first half and probably in the third quarter. One of the most frustrating elements that Golden State fans will take out of this game was the fact that Jerome Robinson played as much as he did. With Podziemski in the starting lineup, CP, Steph out, he was kind of the first ball handling guard, I suppose, off the bench, if you want to call it that. Although even in those lineups that he was in, I would argue that it was Kuminga who was almost the point guard, or the offense was really run across a multitude of players rather than one person bringing the ball up on every single occasion. But I suppose you would say he was the first guard off the bench. How many minutes did he play? He had Jerome Robinson. He had 6 points and 5 rebounds on 2 of 11 shooting. How many minutes did he play? He played 21 minutes. So he was the first player off the bench for Golden State. Now, Jerome Robinson, 25-year-old, I think, former lottery pick of the Clippers, on a 2-way contract now with the Warriors. Frustrating. Really frustrating, the fact that early on he played more than Lester Quinones. Because if you're going to have a ball handling kind of combo guard coming off the bench with Steph and CP out, I just think it should have been Quinones. He has done more recently. Now, Kerr will point to the fact that Robinson's a little bit more experienced, probably a little bit more trustworthy. I don't give a shit. Excuse the language. I don't give a. It's a preseason game. Now, again, regular season game. First of all, if you're relying on Quinones or Jerome Robinson as your first kind of combo guard off the bench, you're in trouble, right? You're probably going to lose the game anyway because Steph and CP are probably both out. But I can understand that if that were the case in a regular season game, maybe Steve likes the trusting nature that Robinson might give you. But it's a preseason game. And to me, the upside of Quinones is worth giving the opportunity to and seeing what he can do. And eventually that came in the second half. And eventually he got more opportunity on the ball, because when Quinones was out there, again, most of the time, they were obviously late in the game, they both played together, but Quinones' early minutes came with Podziemski off the floor. And in that situation, I would have just let Quinones have a little bit more on-ball opportunity, a little bit more pick-and-roll action. Because I do think, one, he's a shot maker, and two, there's some playmaking elements to him, and there's some ball handling elements to him. I was disappointed that it was left so late, because if he'd played more and got a little bit more on-ball chances in the first half, this could have been like a 20 to 25 point game for Lester Quinones, and then we're really talking about it as a big game, rather than an 18-4-4, which is still, it was really good, don't get me wrong, but it's not the eye-catching performance that's necessarily going to tell Steve, oh, this guy needs to play more in the last 3 games. And with Steph and CP coming back in those last 3 games, I think Steve's already said in the post-match that the last 3 games are going to be real ramp-ups for the regular season, close to 30 minutes for the starters. More of the kind of rotation and different combination of units that we're going to see coming into the regular season. So with that in mind, you're probably not going to see Lester Quinones again until the fourth quarter, or garbage time games of these remaining 3 preseason matchups. You're probably not going to see him again, which is disappointing because he's coming off an 18-4-4. And I think it would have been a lot better to see him with the opportunity that Robinson got in the first half and even in the third quarter. Just that should have been pigeonholed to Quinones. Quinones played, was it 24 minutes, I think? 24 minutes. So he ended up playing more than Robinson, but I would have preferred Quinones play 30 and Robinson play 12. Yeah, a little bit disappointing and very frustrating. Very frustrating. Because I think Quinones has got something about him, but I think he needs some consistent opportunity. He's not going to get that, obviously, in the regular season, but he should be getting that now in preseason. you're not putting him necessarily in the same class as Kuminga and Moody because they're, lottery picks, right, that are on the main roster. Like, I get it. And even Pajemski to an extent. But I do think that, hey, we should be seeing more opportunity here for Lester Quinones than what we've seen today and throughout the first two games. And Jerome Robinson on a two-way contract, like, it's the third two-way contract slot. It's not going to make too much of a difference. But I am a little bit surprised with how many chances he's getting. And again, maybe it's just a trust thing with Kerr, and he trusts some guys. He just trusts. We saw it with Anthony Lamb last season, who's now in the NBL, but he was playing meaningful minutes for the Warriors throughout the regular season. Kerr just has his guys, and maybe Robinson is one of those guys. Now, again, I don't think he's a chance for the 14th roster spot. You'd hope not after what we saw against the Kings tonight. But Quinones, play him more, Steve. Play him more. Anyway, Moses Moody quickly. Liked his performance again. Again, solid output, 16 points, 3 rebounds off the bench, 5 of 10 shooting, 3 of 6 from deep. Did he make his first 3? I know he made 2 in the second quarter. One was a really tough, Richard Jefferson alluded to it in the broadcast, a really tough kind of moving back to the 3-point line. I think it was a kind of 2-man game with Saric, I think it was, where he made it over, a semi-contest. Made another one early in the third quarter. He started in place of Clay in the second half. Made another corner 3 there. I think his shot's looking great for starters. And that's probably the biggest thing, is that for him, he's never going to be, a bucket getter in terms of, isolation, give the ball to him, go let him make a play. That's never going to be his go. And for that reason, I think his ceiling is kind of limited, particularly opposed to someone like Kuminga, who is a guy that you can give the ball to and he can go make a play. So for Moody, I think it's about, he shot 36%, 30%, 37% across his first 2 seasons in the league. Like, could we get up to 40%? I think he needs to be a 40% guy to be a regular in the rotation. Now, that sounds like a high mark. I don't think it necessarily is, because playing, he's going to be in a lot of lineups where he's kind of the connector, right? Where he's, Steph, Clay, Wiggs, Dre, and maybe, CP is resting or doesn't have it that night. They want shooting out there rather than Loon. He could be one of those guys that does, he's a connector, as we saw in the postseason against the Lakers. If that's the case, he's going to get some wide open opportunities playing next to Steph and Clay. And so I think shooting 40% from 3 is actually a fairly realistic mark for Moses Moody. And I think he's going to have to do that to be, a 15 plus per minute player for the Warriors this season. But again, good output from him. The defense is still a question mark to me. It's funny because coaches will say that, we want guys who don't foul, who play straight up, verticality, and they don't foul. They don't send guys to the free throw line. I do get frustrated sometimes when, an opposition guard or an opposition perimeter player is attacking against Moses off the dribble. And he kind of just puts his arms up and doesn't really contest in any meaningful way, and almost just is praying that the opponent misses it more than anything. And this is what Andre Iguodala did so well, right? No one's necessarily going to have the hands of Andre Iguodala, but the best defenders actually pick and choose their time where they swipe or they try and block a shot. I just don't see that from Moses. It's all kind of arms straight up, body vertical, don't want to foul at all. And I think he almost needs to be encouraged to, maybe there are chances where you see the ball and you think you can, swipe down and make a steal, or you can actually block a shot or something like that. And if you pick up a foul or 2, so be it. And maybe that's, maybe he's kind of been discouraged because Steve has a short leash with his younger players in terms of, the amount of time they get on the floor. And if you see turnover mistakes or foul mistakes that shouldn't be forthcoming, then, you quickly back on the bench. Maybe he's been discouraged by that, and that would make sense. But there are just times, I think, where he could do a little bit more defensively rather than just almost submit to the player and be like, I'm just going to pray that the guy misses it rather than necessarily, do anything. I just want to get into some comments here. I've missed a few. Sorry, I literally had some of my notes above the comments. So Timothy Santiago, thank you for coming back on. Warriors are deep this year. I agree. Looking really good. Even someone like Quinones today coming out and having an impact. 18-4-4, two-way contract guy. I'll get into Trace Jackson-Davis in a minute here. Simone Parker. Moses is a stable force, always consistent. His three ball is looking great this preseason. Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. He is a consistent presence. even when I'm just talking about the defense there, right? Like he's consistent defensively, but I'm not consistently great. Let's just put it that way. Like I think he could do more to be more impactful on that end of the floor. His three ball, he shot 36-37%, as I said, over his first two seasons in the league. That's solid. That's around or just above league average. That's good, but I've never felt as confident in his jump shot right now as, what we've seen in the past. Like I see his jump shot now, and whenever he puts up a three, even if it's semi-contested, like a couple of the ones we saw in the second quarter, I still feel like it's going in. And it does take a while for that to kind of resonate with fans and even, particularly the opposition. Like we're seeing Kuminga now shoot 7 for 12 from three over the first two games, and you're still going to see start of the regular season. You're still going to see teams kind of back off him and allow him to have that 3-point shot. And I think part of that is the fact that, hey, this guy's explosive at the rim, so we don't want him to drive by and explode at the rim. But, it does take time for young players to build a reputation as a shooter. And I think Moses Moody is starting to do that. And he is with me anyway, because, and I'm sure he is with Simone and other Warrior fans, that he's, he puts the ball up and you think, you think it's going in. So he's, another really good performance today. Really good performance. Back to my notes here. I'll get to the comments as they come through. Trace Jackson-Davis, he should have played more as well. He's in the same boat as Quinones. 4 points, 4 rebounds in 18 minutes. Had a huge block. Kevon Looney, I don't get it. I love Loon. It's not a Loon thing. I don't get Steve's incessant need to play Loon more than he should. Why was he like? You take Clay off at the start at halftime for the start of the third quarter. You bring Moody on for him. That would have been a perfect opportunity to just have Saric or Jackson Davis even start the third quarter. Loon played half the third quarter, and I just don't see it. Particularly when Usman Garuba, who I can talk about. I mean, in fact, I'll talk about Garuba now. He's not playing. He played 3 minutes? Was it? Let me just have a look. 3 minutes for Usman Garuba in the fourth quarter. Why is Loon having, and Loon played well, he had 14 rebounds. Sabonis got a little bit, I feel like there's a clear directive in this one early for Sabonis to try and hit a few jumpers. Now, we know the issues that he had, and how Looney outplayed him in the first round series season, and Sabonis, the Warriors weren't guarding him anywhere, restricted area, basically. Like he could have any mid-range 3-point jump shot he wanted. Felt like there was a directive here because Sabonis had made 0 of 2 threes, went 0 of 2 on threes in the first two preseason games for the Kings. And he took 2 and made 2 in the first 3 minutes of this one. I don't think there's any coincidence that he took a couple threes early and made both of them. But aside from that, Loon had another 14 rebounds. I think, how many offensively? Yeah, 4 offensive boards. So continuing his rebounding presence that he displayed against the Kings in that first round series. So he was good. He was fine. But he played 23 minutes. I just don't think you need to play that much. Just like Saric, Jackson Davis, Gruber. We want to see some of these guys. Saric is a bit different. He's a veteran player. You already know what you're going to get from him to an extent with his offensive skill set. He's shooting the ball well. I found it. We actually saw a bit of Saric at the 4 next to Looney and Jackson Davis in the third quarter, and there was an incredibly hilarious play where it was actually a pick and roll with Saric and Jackson Davis, with Saric as the ball handler. And it actually turned into a Saric off the bounce mid-range jumper that was pure. Like it went in. I had a good laugh at that because I just thought this is a big-to-big pick and roll going on here. You very rarely see that. But we probably should get used to it because you're probably going to see it with like the likes of Chet and Wemby, these absolute freaks of nature who are ball handling 7-footers, and you're probably going to see that a little bit more. So maybe shouldn't be that surprised. But I don't think you're going to see too many Dario Saric, Trace Jackson Davis pick and rolls this season. That might be the only one you see for the next 12 months. So I hope you enjoyed it. Anyway, TJD, he should have just played more. He should have. He should have probably got some of Looney's minutes in the first half. If not, Looney should have probably been rested by half time. Bring Jackson Davis on, give him more opportunity because, I thought he looked really good. His defensive stuff for a rookie now, again, and this is what you get with a 23-year-old who's had 4 years in college. He's just so much more advanced on the defensive end of the floor. Some of his stuff in the pick and roll has been absolutely fantastic. He had a play late in overtime where he was switched out onto Colby Jones, who, first-round pick of the Kings, talented player. And Colby Jones almost looked at him with disdain and thought, well, I've got you covered. You're a big man, right? And then he went right on him, and TJD just stood in front of him the whole time and just didn't let him go by. And he basically got near the paint and had to kick it out, and nothing eventuated in that possession. And it was a really big key to the Warriors' overtime victory because they kept the Kings to, was it 2 points in overtime, I think? No, 4 points. So 10-4 in overtime. So, the Warriors won the game in OT thanks to their defense. And Trace Jackson Davis was a big part of that. His defensive versatility, I think, has been absolutely outstanding. I don't think he's doing enough right now to necessarily warrant minutes in the regular season. I mean, maybe he does with Draymond out. Like, especially if, like, Loon or Saric get into foul trouble. Like, Draymond out, you're going to have Kuminga eat up majority of those minutes. You're going to have, but I guess like that makes Jackson Davis your third string center for the moment, if Green's out. So, you could see him play 5 or 6 minutes maybe. And I don't think it would necessarily be a disaster, particularly with his defensive chops that we're seeing from him. So I thought he was fine again, was impressive again. Again, not enough to absolutely scream out, hey, I should be getting minutes at the start of the regular season. But again, I don't think he was afforded that opportunity because, he only plays 18 minutes. He should have played more instead of Loon. There's no doubt about that. Not just checking the comments here, no more at the moment. I just wanted to, a couple more. Let's talk about the other rookie. Brandon Pajemski obviously got the start. Coming off a 10 points, 6 rebound, 10 assist, double-double against the Lakers. I thought he started off the game really well. His patience for, a 20-year-old rookie, I think is unreal. Like, it is brilliant. A couple of times early in the first quarter, we saw him kind of pick up the dribble and then just not rush at all in trying to find a man. And there was 2 occasions. One, he found Wiggs on the wing for a 3. And the second time, he found a cutting Clay who made like a little mid-range banker from the free throw line or just inside. And I just looked at those 2 possessions and I thought, like, the patience here, not to rush, not to, because a lot of players do that, right? Particularly young players. You pick up your dribble, you kind of got nowhere to go, so you look for the first pass you can make. I think he does a really good job of just allowing, all the traffic to go by and just being patient and then finding the right man, finding an open player, and, picking up an assist or whatever else. And then he had that play, like his first score, where he was patient again and kind of step through move for the layup. That was really impressive. But like he ends the game 4.6 rebounds, 4 assists in 31 minutes. So certainly not as fantastic, not as impressive as the first 2 games. Certainly not a disastrous game by any means. Like, he was fine. There are scoring question marks to me, and that's not. This is a question mark for the future, right? Because right now, if you can be a solid third string point guard where you are a solid ball handler and you are an excellent decision maker and facilitator, which is particularly important in this Warrior offense. If you can be that, that's helpful. So he can already be a helpful player for Golden State as a rookie, which is great, which is fantastic. But if you're looking forward into the future, where can this guy reach? Well, like, where's his ceiling? Is he a a third-string point guard? Is he a solid backup point guard? Is he a starting point guard on a championship team? You would think that the scoring would have to come along quite a bit because he doesn't have the explosiveness to necessarily, blow by players. He doesn't have the athleticism, to finish at the rim. He's got to be crafty, like we saw that first layup I just described. He's got to be crafty to kind of make that happen, which he can do, but that's not like you're not going to get a heap of them every game, right? You're not going to be able to get 20 points just by doing that. His 3-point shot has, still not, I mean, he's not taking that many. I think he only took 5 shots today. 1 for 5. He only took 1 3. So it shows to me that the confidence in his scoring just isn't quite there. There were a couple of times where I thought he was open for 3-point attempts and he turned them down. So again, the patience I think is fantastic. The facilitating and playmaking is excellent. And for the moment, that might be all the Warriors need to have a helpful player in this rotation. But just going forward in terms of his overall ceiling, I think there are scoring question marks both with his jump shot and his ability just to get by defenders and finish at the rim over interior defenders. So I'm going to be fascinated to see where he ends up in his career. But right now, he's showing himself that he could be a helpful piece for the Warriors and that, Steph or CP are resting on a particular night. He can step in, play 15, 20 minutes, and he'll probably help you. Like, he won't be a disaster. So I think there's some real positives to take out from this game, even though, it was clearly his worst of the 3 matchups. The last thing I just wanted to mention as well, this game, so the Kings started on a 38-25 spurt in the opening period. They made 5 of their first 6 threes. If you didn't watch this game, right, and you just look at the box score and you look at Gary Payton II and you think 2 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals in 19 minutes, not much, right? That's not doing much. I thought he completely turned the game early in the second quarter with his defense. And this is why I think a lot of us, including myself, we kind of almost disregard Gary to an extent. Like I've said already earlier in the offseason, or in the last couple of weeks even, after the first 2 games, I think, JK and Moses will leapfrog GP2 quite significantly to the point where he might not be a regular part of the rotation. And, he might only be a situational player, right? I think I said that on my last episode with Evan Kornstrom. But what we're seeing here is a guy who is an absolutely elite game-changing player on the defensive end. And I thought a couple of the active plays he was able to make on that end in the second quarter completely stifled the Kings' offense. Completely. They dropped 38 in the first quarter. They dropped 21 in the second. And there were multiple possessions that were just completely broken up by Gary Payton II. And so just remember that for people that didn't watch the game, go back. Don't take necessarily a 100% look at the box score and see 2 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals, no points, like average to poor game from Gary Payton II. No, impactful game from Gary Payton II. And this is, I think he gets disregarded sometimes because he's far from a box score player, right? There's guys that put up numbers and it looks great, but it's not impactful to winning. And then there's guys like GP2 who don't put up numbers at all, but are impactful to winning. And I just thought that it's come 40 plus minutes into this post-game live. Just thought he deserved to mention for the fact that he was able to kind of change that game to an extent in the second quarter. Thought he was fantastic defensively. Anyway, I'll finish it up there. Obviously, a lot of takeaways. Just check there's no more comments here. Not at the moment. Thanks again to Timothy and Simone for commenting. I'll give it another 60 seconds here just in case there are any more comments, but otherwise we'll leave it at that. I will have this obviously up on YouTube to be able to watch. And of course, on the podcast feed, should be out by tomorrow morning American time, later tonight for me. So you can re-listen to this. And if you have been re-listening to it, thank you for listening. Hopefully next time you can join on the post-game live on YouTube. But other than that, thank you for all the support. Warriors next game, they've got 2 days off, and then Wednesday night US time against the Kings at Chase Center. 3-0 record now to start preseason, unbeaten. It's been a fantastic start for them. As I said on my last postgame live, I actually do buy into preseason a little bit, just based on the fact that the Warriors 4 championships here's a stat just to end the episode or end the postgame live. In the Warriors 4 championships over the past 9 years, they've played 24 preseason games. Their record in that is 19-5. So to me, that just showcases that, hey, preseason means something, not nothing. That is for sure. So I'll just reiterate that point before I go. But other than that, guys, thank you very much for listening. You can find me at POC252. That's POK252 on Twitter or X. Subscribe to the YouTube channel here if you haven't already. You can follow on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Other than that, I'll probably have another episode with a few more takeaways and diving a bit more into this Kings game before Wednesday's game against the Kings again. So looking forward to that one. Be on the lookout. Other than that, guys, enjoy the rest of your week. For those in the US, you don't have a couple of hours to go. But for me, Monday afternoon here, looking forward to a big week ahead with plenty of Warriors content, both here on YouTube, on the podcast feed, and of course, you can catch my writing daily on Fansided's Blue Man Hoop.